Misogyny. Okay, let's be a little bit more thorough. It's pretty common knowledge at this point that fandom struggles to properly appreciate female characters. This is despite fandom being primarily female dominated and defined by women for decades now. Of course, nerd spaces have often been perceived as a boys' club, especially the comic and video game spaces, but this is ultimately inaccurate to the history of fandoms and fandom culture, particularly when it comes to the Star Trek fandom, as female fans essentially pioneered fanfiction culture as we know it today. Then again, I don't think I need to explain how sexism is so embedded in our culture that it seeps into the world of fiction frequently, both canonly and fanonly. But oddly enough, this male-centric fanon behavior doesn't just come from male fans, but many AFAB fans as well. The Supernatural fandom, for example, has largely been defined by women since day one. And despite the predominantly female audience, pretty much every female character who was implied to be a possible love interest for the brothers was violently hated. But when Castiel came, fanfiction for him and Dean was posted that very night. Some may argue that this lack of interest for female characters correlates with how interesting or well written they are, but I disagree because even media with primarily female casts, or at the very least large female casts, suffer from this phenomenon. So why is this such a universal problem in fandom spaces? Well, to start, let's look at some notable examples and see if we can find some common trends.
Have no fear. Amy Rose is here.
Time for the obligatory Sonic talk, but this time it's split up into two segments. First, let's talk about Amy Rose. Amy Rose is one of the main and most misunderstood characters in the Sonic franchise. She's existed in the series since the classic era, first appearing in Sonic CD, and has been a staple ever since then. And her history in the franchise is definitely rocky. This is because Amy's main consistent trait is her crush on Sonic, a crush that is unrequited. Now, Sonic has always been a bit of an unconventional hero, especially in comparison to characters like Mario. Since one of Mario's main traits is rescuing the damsel in distress, who he is in love with, it does make sense to me why Sonic wouldn't have a prominent romantic plotline. But Amy was still written as someone who loved Sonic romantically, and as the franchise evolved and the stories became more in-depth, Amy's character would shift over time. I would argue the game that set the basis for her future portrayals was Sonic Adventure, where she was a playable character. Sonic Adventure 2 would continue this with her being a major emotional core to Shadow's redemption. But despite these games showcasing her unflinching kindness and empathy, even towards the villains, the only things people ever commented on for years was her obsession with Sonic. No other part of her personality was discussed, neither was her relationships with characters like Cream, Blaze, Silver, Shadow, or Knuckles. She was just an obsessive Sonic fangirl who Sonic hated and found annoying. And in all fairness, the parts of her personality that are often overlooked, her bravery, her compassion, her earnestness, her hobbies, that was rarely ever the core of her character. Her crush on Sonic was. Up until recently, that is. But even then, people still hate Amy in the modern day for simply being more proactive in the restoration plans. A common criticism of the IDW comics is that Amy is just a replacement for Sally Acorn from the Archie comics, because she acts as a leader and commander sometimes. Never mind the fact that static franchises are naturally going to evolve their characters and give them new things to do. Never mind the fact that she has many traits that set her apart from Sally. Never mind the fact that Sally was born a leader because she was a fucking princess, while Amy just wants to help people. Never mind the fact that Sally's skill set was more tech-focused, while Amy's is more melee and commander-focused. Never mind all that. As we all know, Amy's only relevance to the franchise is being a Sonic simp, and she isn't allowed to have any cool moments of her own. This criticism harkens back to the misinterpretation of the term strong female character, this idea that a strong female character is meant in a literal sense. And while Amy is canonically very strong, being able to wield a massive hammer, her strength as a character comes from her passionate and unrestrained emotions. And I like Sally, don't get me wrong, but Sally's strengths came from her level-headedness and intelligence. Neither one of these strengths is inherently better than the other because these are completely separate characters who don't need to be in constant competition. Both characters add something different to the universe, and while I do think Amy has been given a lot more room to shine in recent media, especially Frontiers and the comics, it was not easy being an Amy fan since childhood. I was fighting in the trenches at age 7, I swear. But Amy is not the only female character in the Sonic franchise to deal with some insane backlash. In fact, there's a newer character who has gained a lot of criticism as of late.
Lanolin the Sheep. Yes, I'm stealing the long pause bit. Hi, my name is Amy. Amy Eve, that is. Not talking about Amy Rose, ironically enough, because while I do have my own opinions about the character I got my name from, mainly that I'm just kinda fine with how she is now, I think I have a bit more to say about the Insomniac fluffball over here. Lanolin, having made background appearances ever since issue 2 of the IDW Sonic comics, would eventually graduate to being a fully fledged character in issue 57. Retroactively making her the first IDW original Sonic character, before even Rough and Tumble or Tangle the Lemur made their debuts in issues 3 and 4 respectively. From the few panels we see her in before the Urban Warfare storyline began proper, we already get a pretty good idea of her character before she's even named by the comic itself. Besides the eye bags she's very frequently drawn with, implying that she probably needs more sleep, she's fairly by the books, calling Jewel by her title of Director Jewel in issue 37, even when she insists that just her name is fine. And fairly quick to startle as shown in this same panel, as well as in issue 41 where she rather loudly announces the Chaotix' presence to Jewel. This demonstrates another trait of Lanolin's personality that we'll see far more of when she gets more spotlight. She's bossy, and says as much in the aforementioned Urban Warfare arc. I'm just gonna tuck that away for later, like, right here? Yeah, that's good. Coolio Tulio. Let's shed some light on her spotlight arcs, shall we? Now, I'd say Urban Warfare is Lanolin at her best. Not only do we get to learn more about her backstory, how she joined the Restoration out of a desire to feel less helpless, but we also get to see her in action properly, as well as what makes her tick. Her fear of failure, her bewilderment at Sonic and Tangle's unorthodox tactics, and how intent she is on being a problem for Eggman or anyone else that tries to do some shady shit. She's a badass and a hard ass, who balances out Tangle and Whisper's tomfoolery in a fairly grounded way that we haven't really seen in any Sonic characters before. And then along came the Mimic. Misadventures is the arc where things start to go downhill. By that, I mean it's where the hating starts. See, Lanolin might have been in the comics for longer, she's still fairly recent in terms of character focus. So, when this perceived new character, who has stated herself to be bossy and inexperienced, is seen being bossy and inexperienced to established characters and is also a woman? Well, we've got a recipe for disaster on our hands, mothers and fuckers! Let's see what got people to start hating her guts, shall we? Checks notes. She snatched Tangle's paddle ball because it was making noise during her meeting. Pretty tame so far. She accepted Duo the Cat, quote-unquote, who is shown to be the shape-shifting Mimic the Octopus to the audience, but not the characters. Therefore, none of the new Diamond Cutters know that he's Mimic. She fought Whisper and Silver because they accused Duo of being Mimic, something that neither one presents any evidence for, with the former even escalating the situation to a fight in the first place by grabbing Lanolin's arm unprompted. And she kicked popular male character Silver, who is a whole topic of his own, off the team for making the accusation in the first place, which again, no evidence was provided. Whoa! Then, the new Diamond Cutters continue to be driven apart during the Phantom Riders arc, because not only is Lanolin, who has stated herself to be bossy and inexperienced, but Mimic also continues to sow distrust between her and the lesbians, causing them to withhold the information that Sonic is the Phantom Rider from her because they don't trust her. It's almost like Mimic's whole plan was to sow distrust and drive the team apart, and that Lanolin, like Tangle, Whisper, and Silver, is also a victim of said plan! Gee! Ain't that something? So after the clean sweepstakes is over with, the new Diamond Cutters disband, and Tangle, Whisper, and popular male character Silver go to kill Mimic, while Lanolin is effectively written out of the story to rebuild Emeraldville or whatever. I fully believe that Lanolin staying behind was a result of the hatedom she received, and she would have been around for that fight with Mimic otherwise. I will die on this hill, ignore the tinfoil hat, she was done dirty! Oh lord, and that's not even to mention when people mischaracterize Tangle and Whisper and try to make them out to be the bad guys for withholding information from Lanolin, even though they were victims of Mimic's plan too! In conclusion, I think that Lanolin was a refreshing change of pace for a Sonic character, being a civilian-turned-hero that ultimately got the short end of the stick thanks to how her character was received and handled in the wake of said reception. She's also hot as fuck.
You're not afraid of centipedes, are you?
Jax! That's literally my only fear. Why would you do this?
I'll be honest, Ragatha is like 80% of why I'm making this video. Ragatha is one of the main 6 characters in The Amazing Digital Circus. From the moment the pilot aired, Ragatha is shown to be someone who bottles up her emotions and tries her best to act pleasant and friendly. She's shown to be very affected by the nature of the circus, but she attempts to be optimistic to little avail. It has been suggested throughout the few episodes we have that Ragatha's people-pleasing behavior was a bit of an act, or at the very least not entirely how she actually is. A major example of this is in episode 4, Fast Food Masquerade, where she essentially is drugged and begins to speak more honestly. And by honestly, I mean very bluntly, directly saying she hates Jax but doesn't want him to hate her. There is also a scene with Pomni and Gangle where Gangle mentions not entirely trusting Ragatha's kind act. Of course, Gangle is a very anxious character, and anxious people often believe kindness directed towards them is fake. This lends some narrative plausible deniability for Ragatha, but the fact that this element of her character has been hinted at so many times is clearly a sign of foreshadowing. Foreshadowing that has now become more blatant, despite the fandom mostly ignoring it. On June 20th, the 5th episode of The Amazing Digital Circus aired, simply called Untitled. And almost instantly after this episode aired, there was a notable shift in how the fandom perceived Ragatha. This is because of 2 moments in the episode. One where she brings up a sore spot for Jax, his old friend who was implied to have abstracted. However, she apologizes for this later in the episode. And the other is when she curses out Jax. And because of these 2 moments, there was a rise in discourse about Ragatha. It's almost annoyingly ironic in a way. The show pretty much directly shows in the text that her people-pleasing behavior was caused by trauma, and the one time she doesn't act like that, fans say she was out of line. What are we doing, guys? This is just ridiculous. I hate to sound like a broken record, as many people have pointed this out, but it kind of feels like we proved Ragatha's anxiety right. You know, Ragatha being a people-pleaser out of fear that people will hate her if she's honest about her emotions, and then when she curses out the guy who's been nothing but an asshole to her, she gets blamed for it. Now, I should mention a major factor of this discourse is the undeniable fact that Jax is a massively popular character, and he is a man who is heavily woobified. Jax has been a beloved character since the pilot dropped, and while there was a bit of a drop-off as the show continued, there were still a lot of people who love him. And considering the newest episode showed Jax being a bit more complex, something that people have been waiting for since the pilot, Ragatha was basically screwed. Which sucks, because as someone who has been a Ragatha fan since literal day 1, I truly think the fandom favoritism towards Jax is burying any interesting discussion about Ragatha. I know fandoms like their bad boys and their asshole characters, and I know online there's a lot of discourse about people pleasers, but I genuinely think Ragatha is simply misunderstood because people don't want to actually analyze her. It's very fitting that her digital avatar is a doll because that's who she is. She believes all she has to do to survive is be smiling and warm, do what everyone else wants her to do, even if it hurts her, because that's how she can make them all happy. She's not allowed to have any desires or negative thoughts of her own because she's just the circus's collective ragdoll. And, in a way, isn't that a feeling many of us have experienced? Oh, and also Ragatha is hot as fuck! White Lily Cookie is one of the 5 ancient cookies from Cookie Run Kingdom, and arguably the most important character to the game's lore. And by that I mean she essentially causes the entire plot of the game. White Lily Cookie's soul gem is the Light of Freedom, which is a narrative choice I have always found fascinating, because on the surface it feels as if her soul gem should be swapped with pure vanilla cookies, as his is the Light of Truth. Surely the cookie who sought the truth of her kind at the cost of everything would embody the Light of Truth, but no, she's the Light of Freedom, which I find very fascinating. But first, let me explain the necessary context of her story. An important element of Cookie Run lore is the existence of the witches, the creators of the cookies, and people bake cookies to eat them, and the witches do the same. But a majority of the cookies in canon are not aware of this. The relationship the cookies have with the witches is comparable to the relationship a human has with God. So, enter White Lily Cookie, a character who wishes to learn the secrets of cookie origins. This facet of her character would end up serving as the domino effect for the entire game, as White Lily Cookie would end up traveling to a witch's banquet and witness a group of witches eating cookies. She is understandably horrified and ends up falling in a batch of uncooked dough. The witches notice this and decide to bake the dough, leading to the creation of the franchise's main antagonist, Dark Enchantress Cookie. Now I'll be frank, this plotline gets a little confusing from here, because Dark Enchantress Cookie is simultaneously a different person from White Lily Cookie, and also a part of White Lily Cookie. Like, they're separate entities, but they also share a soul, and White Lily Cookie was split into, like, spirit fragments or something? I have no idea. It's weird. Anyway, because of the creation of Dark Enchantress Cookie, there were a lot of consequences in the lore of the game, most notably the annihilation of the Golden Cheese Kingdom and the death of all its citizens, something that Golden Cheese Cookie struggles to forgive White Lily Cookie for. And while White Lily Cookie has been trying to rectify the actions of Dark Enchantress Cookie, her dialogue makes it abundantly clear that she suffers immense guilt from the actions that have transpired. Now, because the nature of White Lily Cookie's connection to Dark Enchantress Cookie is really confusing, there is room to speculate on how accurate White Lily Cookie's guilt is. She believes that everything Dark Enchantress Cookie has done is her fault, even though she didn't willingly create Dark Enchantress Cookie. That was the result of the witches fucking around and finding out. Despite all of this discrepancy, there are a lot of people in the fandom who genuinely blame her for all the events of the story, which I think in doing so, these fans miss a key factor of the story, that being the fact that the ancient heroes are very flawed heroes. Of course, you are more likely to see criticism of the actions of the 3 female ancients out of the 5 compared to the 2 male ancients. Funny how that keeps happening. But all the ancients are explicitly flawed, complex characters. But the reason I chose White Lily Cookie as the ultimate scapegoat of misogyny in the Cookie Run fandom is because White Lily Cookie is often watered down and misunderstood in the fandom, especially compared to other prominent female characters. Now, some may say that White Lily Cookie is different because her mistake is a huge plot point in the story, that it heavily affects the lore. But so does Dark Cacao Cookie's mistake, and White Lily Cookie is working to fix her mistake in the current plot. I'd argue White Lily Cookie is the Light of Freedom because despite her mistakes, she is still fighting for the freedom she desires, and she deserves the freedom to make those mistakes. Though, a major difference as well is White Lily Cookie's relationship with Pure Vanilla Cookie. Because these two are often paired together and hinted at being romantic, many fans inherently hate White Lily Cookie, especially recently with the introduction of Shadow Milk Cookie. I'm going to discuss this in a bit, but people will often hate a female character for simply being implied to be romantically involved with a male character, White Lily Cookie being a good example of that. So I fully believe White Lily Cookie's hate has more to do with that than it does her actions, because it especially aligns with the rise of Shadow Vanilla in the past few months. I'm just saying.
I'll eat you! I'll eat your mom! I'll eat your eggs! Oh!
Boo. It's me. I've stolen this video because I heard we were talking about women being misrepresented, so I'm putting on my Phoenix Wright fit because the way the Adventure Time fandom treats Princess Bubblegum is so dirty and I shall stand for it no longer. For context, Princess Bubblegum, who I'm going to be calling PB because it's easier, was originally introduced by being kidnapped by Ice King, Finn and Jake save her, blah blah blah, you get the point. This happened a lot throughout seasons 1 and 2, but it wasn't all she did. For example, in the episode Dungeon, Finn and Jake get trapped in a dungeon. Very shocking, I know. But it concludes with the PB coming in on her weird swan thing and saving the two of them. But this didn't stay for long, with the show changing drastically from the first 2 seasons from the rest of the series, so PB changed with it. And the best way I can show this is through Goliad. Goliad is a character that PB created with her own DNA to replace her as the monarch of the Candy Kingdom if she were to die. Throughout the episode, Goliad shows that she thinks because she's so powerful that she should be able to control everyone, and eventually reveals that she has the power of mind control. Though she is eventually stopped by Stormo, who is a DNA creation PB made of Finn's DNA instead. Now, with Stormo reflecting Finn being the incarnation of good through the comet, we can only assume that Goliad mirrors PB, which she does. Throughout the series, PB is shown to be controlling and power-hungry. Now, with most of the fandom, that's where their understanding and analysis of PB ends. She's a power-hungry ruler who is messed up and evil forever and ever and ever, which is just completely not the case. And I know this because there is an entire episode talking about this, which people just ignore for some reason. So now, we talk about the Season 6 episode, The Cooler. In this episode, the Fire Kingdom is rapidly cooling down, to the point where the inhabitants are starting to die. To help with this, Flame Princess calls PB to come help. Throughout the episode, PB is trying to bond with Flame Princess, who makes it very clear that they aren't friends and this is just for her kingdom. And then they get to the Fire Giants, which are ancient relics made to help the Fire Kingdom in a crisis. When Flame Princess showed these to PB, she starts to deactivate them by removing their modules. Flame Princess finds out about this and the two fight, ending with PB making Flame Princess accidentally destroy most of the Fire Giants. After the fight, PB admits that she's the reason the Fire Kingdom is cooling, so she could gain access to their weapons. She knew about them by sticking a camera inside Cinnamon Bun, who's been living in the Fire Kingdom for a while now, to spy on them. And when confronted about that, she says, and I quote, "I'm PB, I spy on everybody, no big D," which causes Flame Princess to say one of the most important lines to PB's character ever. "You're cold. Not because you're a scientist or a leader, but because you are a bad person." And this hits PB, and starts her arc of change, which starts at the end of the episode, where she disconnects all their cameras watching the Land of Ooh, abandoning her control. The reason I talk about this is that people apparently just couldn't see PB past this episode, and truly in their hearts believe that PB is evil. Which is just really stupid. She's one of the main protagonists and is constantly helping Finn, who, may I remind you, is the cosmic incarnation of good. People just really hate to forgive female characters in any situation ever, and it's really annoying because I love PB. I think her story and character are super interesting and unique, but whenever I try to talk about it, she's just pure evil to everyone on the planet. Now, that's my first gripe done. That's right, baby. Round 2, because I gotta talk about the Yuri. Bubbling, while being my favorite ship in the show, equally makes me want to smash my head through my table. Because why are people making PB so bland? So many times the focus is on Marceline and her stuff with Simon and the vampires and her dead mum and blah blah blah. Don't get me wrong, I love Marcy, she's my second favourite of the whole show, though no one's being the lich in that department. But my god, PB is not a comfort machine. She has so many problems to be explored, like how her friend is not only a cosmic being, but also also an incarnation of her dead friend who stole from her. On how her only actual family member is a dragon locked under the castle who can't speak, or her family situation in its entirety. I want more PB rep that isn't evil controlling scientist or Marceline comfort machine. There's so much more that can be done here, and yet no one wants to explore it. Either that, or they're just blind to it all because they've been told to be by everyone who just makes their own conclusion, I guess. Whatever. I'm done now. I'm letting Fizz out the basement to continue whatever the hell they were talking about.
The future is in the past. Onward, Daoshima!
Oh, Mabel pines. Easily one of the worst examples of a female character hated for completely unfair reasons. Mabel is one of the two protagonists of the Disney Channel show Gravity Falls alongside her twin brother Dipper. While Dipper is anxious, sarcastic, book-smart, and more serious, Mabel is basically whimsy incarnate. She's unabashed about her interests, she's loud, chaotic, and goofy, and overall a great balance for Dipper. Now, despite both kids having moments of being selfish because they are both 12 years old, most of the fandom tended to hate Mabel specifically, which is really annoying, especially when the show is willing to show both kids being in the wrong. Dipper can also be just as self-absorbed and obsessed with his own interests, even at the cost of others' safety. I'm not even gonna touch on the rift thing, because she was panicked, emotionally vulnerable, and thought she was talking to a friend, and sure, Mabel may have accidentally given Bill Cipher the rift, but Dipper knowingly made a deal with him. But strangely, you rarely ever see the same level of criticism towards Dipper. I wonder why. Another moment people often point out to justify their hatred of Mabel is the events of the episode The Time Traveler's Pig, where Dipper has to sacrifice a chance to impress Wendy to make Mabel happy. A lot of people treat this moment as Mabel being selfish, which I think is incredibly unfair and also kind of dense, for lack of a better word. The way people talk about this episode online, people act as if Mabel was being guilt-trippy and manipulative towards Dipper, when a major theme of the show is that the two twins have each other's backs above everyone else. If Dipper couldn't win that carnival game without the insane plan he concocted, it's almost like the universe itself didn't want him to win it. Which would make sense when you consider the fact that Dipper was never going to be able to impress Wendy in that way. They were never going to work out, guys. Plus, it wasn't a stuffed animal that Mabel was upset over, it was a pet she had instantly bonded with. Imagine if you got a pet one day and a few hours later they're yanked away from you due to something out of your control. So, like, genuinely, I don't see how Mabel is in the wrong here. I honestly believe the only reason Mabel gets the bulk of the criticism is because she's a girl who is a very traditional teenage girl. There is truly nothing the world hates more than a passionate teenage girl, no matter what she's like.
Alphys posted a picture. Dinner with the girlfriend. Wait, I thought Alphys was a girl.
So remember when I said that Ragatha was like 80% of why I was making this video? Toriel is the other 20%. But first, let's talk about Alphys, since she's been getting this treatment since about 2015 when the game first came out. Alphys is probably the Undertale character who is the most collectively misunderstood. Depending on who you ask, she is either Undyne's girlfriend and nothing else, or a twisted, irredeemable mad scientist. And I would say neither of these are entirely fair. Firstly, I just don't like it when characters are acknowledged only in the context of a ship. It's just a fandom pet peeve of mine. But getting into the actual meat of the discourse because of Alphys' actions in the context of the True Lab, a lot of people view her as evil. I always thought this was weird because of how Undertale is. It's a game about forgiveness and kindness. It's a game about characters who are flawed and changed by friendship. Why is Alphys seen as an exception? Well, if I'm being honest, I think a major reason is because Alphys is kinda chubby. I am dead serious. I truly believe that because Alphys is seen as less attractive than someone like Toriel, she is less appreciated. But speaking of Toriel, let's discuss the recent Deltarune discourse. For those who somehow have no idea what I'm talking about, there is a scene at the end of Deltarune Chapter 4 that a lot of people hate. After Chris and Susie return to the town, they enter Chris's house and see a slightly tipsy Toriel dancing with Sans. It's a funny scene on the surface with a bit of tragedy when you overanalyze it, but it's not really much deeper than that. Toriel got kind of drunk and was befriending Sans the entire time when Chris and Susie were in the Dark World. But so many people turned on Toriel, acting as if she was an alcoholic, abusive, neglectful mother who didn't care where Chris was. Which is just not true. Now, funny enough, people also did turn on Sans and mischaracterize him, which I have never really seen for a popular male character, very progressive and woke. But undoubtedly, Toriel received the brunt of the hate. Much like Ragatha, the second Toriel wasn't the perfect, cuddly mother figure you all perceived, she was deemed problematic, which is especially weird because Toriel has been a character for much longer than Ragatha, and she has always been a flawed character. And also, in the context of Deltarune specifically, Asgore is given way too much grace from the fandom. We haven't seen much of him in Deltarune, but what we have seen is that every single time he appears, he makes Toriel uncomfortable when she is just out here trying to live her life. I am willing to accept that they are both flawed parents trying their best, but one of them seriously needs to read the room more often, and it's not Toriel. I swear, the second a man is funny, all sins are forgiven. That being said, the egg's husband line is a banger line. But yeah, my point is that Toriel is not a bad mom. You guys just did not understand that scene at all.
Are you okay?
Ochako Uraraka, one of the main characters of the widely popular shonen phenomenon My Hero Academia, and one of the worst examples of female-centric hatedom in all of fandom. She also is one of the best examples of how male-centric fandom behavior aligns with shipping preferences. Now, in terms of her actual writing, Uraraka is probably the least nuanced character I've discussed so far. Not because she's necessarily a bad character, but rather because My Hero Academia is pretty awful in terms of its female characters. Pretty much every female character in the show is significantly less fleshed out in comparison to the male characters. Uraraka is not an exception. Uraraka's main character traits are being poor and having a crush on Deku. That sounds like a joke hyperbole, but it's really not. She's set up as an important character, but she is very quickly sidelined for characters like Bakugo or Todoroki, which sucks because I like Uraraka. And of course, she's still technically an essential character. She's far from the worst example of female characters getting sidelined in the story. But in terms of her character development, she only has one notable fight where the best of her character is shown off, and it's literally the fight where she dies. Yes, she gets revived and the scene is really good and the Yuri is toxic and beautiful, but like, come on! And while I could easily discuss how Uraraka and by extension the rest of the female characters are sidelined by the show, that's not really what this video is about. Now the fandom? Oh boy, where do we begin with that? Uraraka was truly cursed due to being the closest thing the show has to a love interest for Deku. However, because she isn't given much growth by the narrative, people prefer to ship Deku with characters like Todoroki and Bakugo. Now, to give the benefit of the doubt, I assume a lot of people who preferred these ships did so because these characters were given way more development compared to Uraraka, thus there were more interesting stories to be told with the ship. With Bakugo especially, there are a lot of people who enjoy enemies to lovers, and for the story it tells, rather than any typical wholesome friends-to-lovers dynamic. No, the real issue is the people who hated Uraraka for simply, quote-unquote, getting in the way of Tododeku and Bakudeku. Now, you may be asking, how exactly did Uraraka get in the way of ships that are not canon and only exist in a fan's imagination? And that's a very good question. In all seriousness, I'd say up until the past few years, a lot of ship wars were based around the idea of which ship was going to be canon, and many people didn't want Uraraka and Deku to be a canon couple due to their preferences for Bakudeku or Tododeku. Frankly, I never understood this because shipping has never been about canonicity, but whatever. As a result of this, Uraraka's role in the fandom was just as the forced het romantic partner for Deku, and considering the show barely gave her any development until the end, there unfortunately was not a lot of reason for fans to want to explore her character any more than that. And maybe things would have been slightly less bad if Uraraka had actual consistent character development, but let's be honest, she still would have been hated regardless. Female love interests for male characters are widely hated in fandoms if Amy Rose and White Lily Cookie and the anecdote about the Supernatural fandom didn't already hammer that in. But Uraraka is the worst example I've discussed so far. Maybe because Bakudeku and Totodeku were such behemoths in the fandom, maybe because people found Uraraka bland and annoying, maybe because of the overwhelming power of rivalry yaoi, I don't know. But it didn't matter, because the hate for Uraraka was honestly inescapable for a time, and it really sucks, because she had so much potential as a character. And though that potential was somewhat reached with the Himiko Toga fight, it was just one really good moment where she briefly shines while the male characters get to soar. Other female characters that people have brought up to me include Skylar White, Sakura Haruno, Amber Bennett, Mel Medarda, Jade Harley, Nepeta Lejeune, Fefri Pisces, Twilight Sparkle, Susie Wonder, Nazuna Hiwatashi, Blake Belladonna, Usagi Tsukino, Rose Tico, Rei Skywalker, Ruan Mei, Princess Peach, Sayaka Maizono, Rose Quartz, Pearl, Elizabeth Midford, Susie Haltman, Mu Kusunoki, Yukari Takaba, Jenny Letterson, Amber Velakis, and every single female character in Warrior Cats. So, why does this happen? This is obviously a massive issue in all kinds of fandoms, and many people have discussed this, so why? Well, I have a few theories. So on the page for misogyny in fandom on Fanlore, I noticed something in regards to misogyny in the realm of RPF. That the two examples given related to jealousy towards the women in the lives of the real people the fandom was centered around. This seemed to be especially the case in the One Direction fandom, and centered around the idea that the existence of these women ruined the fantasy of getting with these men. And so, I began to wonder if this might be able to be connected to fiction as well. After all, this would explain certain behaviors towards female characters in the context of shipping. If you are attracted to a male character, and that character is shipped with a female character, I suppose I can see how one would be annoyed. It is not entirely uncommon for some fans to feel so attached to a character they feel personally offended when a character is portrayed a certain way. Now, quick disclaimer, this might sound as if I'm targeting self-shippers or Yume shippers, and implying that those who ship themselves with male characters are all misogynistic. That is not what I'm saying. I have a huge amount of respect for self-shippers. I honestly understand feeling protective of your FO, as long as you respect other people. And obviously, you could still be a Yume shipper while still appreciating the character's canon love interest. Not all self-shippers are like the RPF examples I mentioned. But I do believe that this theory has some merit, especially considering how common jealousy seems to play a role in particularly older fandoms. We tend to forget this now, but there was a period of time where queer media was not as easy to find online, so there were a lot of fandom spaces consisting of straight women heavily attracted to male characters. For example, early Supernatural fandom. While this is less common nowadays, a lot of early fandom content consisted of women choosing between the two brothers based on which one they found hotter. Of course, Castiel threw a massive can of worms into this, but you see my point, right? Fans wanted to be with these male characters and viewed any love interest as a threat. This is a less common experience nowadays, but it is still interesting to me. A common justification I see for female characters being less popular is the claim that these female characters are written worse, and to some degree this is technically true, but this doesn't mean anything in the context of fanon. Fanon often is about seeing the potential of what a character could be. Very rarely does bad writing stop fanon, you know, when it comes to male characters. I think this argument completely falls apart when you approach media that is heavily female-centric, but this claim isn't entirely wrong, sadly, because unfortunately it is an undeniable fact that a lot of female characters are treated as extensions of male characters and otherwise less important to the story. And now, I'm going to do something that might surprise a lot of people. I'm going to criticize the writing of Sir Palo's Spooky Month. Now, I love Spooky Month. I adore it. Just look at my Tumblr. But it is undeniable that Spooky Month's female characters are flawed in their design. I don't necessarily think they are badly written, far from it. The problem lies with the lack of diversity in the characters. Out of the 5 speaking recurring female characters, only one lacks a familial connection to a more important male character. 3 out of the 5 are mothers, 1 is an older sister, and that leaves Patty as the sole female character not defined by a connection to another male character. This isn't even mentioning Robert's sister or John's daughter, who are yet to be seen but referenced consistently, and are also defined by being family members to a more important male character. Again, this isn't an attack on Spooky Month or Palo specifically, it's just an example of the type of writing that is still very common in the modern day. Uraraka from My Hero Academia is unfortunately a good example of this, as well as most of the female characters in that show, to be honest. I genuinely believe some people prefer male-male ships because the male characters are usually more complex. Please God, can we start letting female characters be more complex? This one is going to be a bit controversial, but I believe a good portion of what determines a female character's popularity is dependent on how much the audience finds them attractive. And this can often be uncomfortable when discussing media like My Hero Academia, so I shall tread lightly. But let's just say between Pomni and Ragatha, Pomni is the one who tends to be drawn more suggestively, and Pomni is a much more popular character than Ragatha. If Ragatha was already disliked because she wasn't seen as attractive, it doesn't surprise me that it didn't take long for people to turn on her. So often in both fandom and real life, an opinion on a woman is based on how pretty she is perceived, so female characters who are more conventionally attractive are often allowed more grace compared to characters less commonly simped for. This is especially the case with more mainstream and popular fandoms that have a wide variety of fans. I'm not gonna linger on this one too much because it's a pretty basic theory, but it was worth bringing up. In recent years, I think it's safe to say the term girl boss has become more annoying than endearing, and there's not really a good way to discuss this because it sounds counteractive, but it is a trend I've noticed. The term girl boss has become another box that female characters get shoved into in fandom spaces. I mentioned earlier that in terms of the strong female character, that term has often become misconstrued to mean strong in a literal sense. But it also means a female character must be strong and awesome and badass all the time and never flawed, because fandom likes uncomplicated female characters. And oftentimes this indirectly results in the watering down of a female character's flaws and mistakes. If a female character is cool but flawed, the flaws are just ignored and never discussed. But it wasn't always the case. I remember when discussions online regarding strong female characters were starting to get popular. But in regards to the nature of strong female characters, so often people and even corporations will fall into the trap of making a female character a girl boss as a cheat code to make her seem strong. It's well-meaning, but it's very narrow and vapid in reality. Strength in terms of character writing is more about how compelling a character is. If a character is a girl boss and nothing else, she probably is not a strong character. But people often lean into this type of character writing because of how common it has become in pop culture and marketing. This type of character writing is well-intentioned, but ultimately bland and continues the trend of boringly strong female characters. In line with the girl boss theory, I think that if a character is more traditionally feminine, she is more likely to be unreasonably hated. Look at the characters I have discussed, a majority of them align more femininely. When you compare the soft-spoken White Lily Cookie to the bold and brash Holly Berry Cookie and Golden Cheese Cookie, when you compare the primarily pink Amy Rose to the cool, badass Blaze the Cat, you can notice a dichotomy. Characters who are more feminine, whether in terms of design or character traits, are more likely to be hated compared to characters who count as girl bosses. In the case of examples I just mentioned, characters like Blaze the Cat, Holly Berry Cookie, and Golden Cheese Cookie are seen as better examples of strong female characters because they are seen as better fighters. Never mind the fact that Amy Rose and White Lily Cookie are canonically strong fighters. They are just perceived as more feminine due to their design and characteristics, therefore they are hated more. And it makes sense if you analyze how things perceived as feminine are often seen as vapid and dumb, no matter what they are. Any interest in makeup and fashion or a design that features longer hair or a dress is more likely to cause the character to be demeaned. This is your daily reminder that even though a lot of progress has been made, there is still work to do. I feel like this is the most obvious and therefore likeliest answer. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, misogyny is still very present in the world of fandom spaces. Discussions of characters and their actions are often incredibly hypocritical, with intense double standards being placed on female characters. Female characters are boiled and watered down to a simple trope or archetype, and the praise for female characters is entirely dependent on impossible standards of perfection. I don't need to explain how plain old misogyny presents itself in fandom. You've likely seen it. But I'd argue it has especially gotten worse in recent years, with fandom culture becoming more mainstream post-2020. Recently, some fandom members have argued that the events of 2020 caused a spike in normies entering fandom spaces and disrupting it, and I don't entirely think this is an unfair argument. Fandom, particularly fanfiction, used to be seen as weird and cringe, an exclusive club we gatekept. It was a special escape for the nerds, but not really anymore. With more people in fandom, the higher ratio of misogynists, because there are a lot of misogynists in the world. With the rise of social media like TikTok, it's easier than ever for someone who sucks to integrate into a fandom space. But discussions like this are never always that simple. Now, this is a complex topic on its own. A lot of misogyny present in fandom is, in my opinion, largely tied back to internalized misogyny. This is something that is overwhelmingly present on the internet in many different forms, and I think it's safe to say that a lot of AFAB people online have some form of internalized misogyny. I know I did, as someone who had a not like other girls phase. Now I'm not even a girl. But regardless, many people who are AFAB have negative associations with the experience of being AFAB, ignoring the more disturbing and serious examples of AFAB experiences. We literally cannot enjoy anything without being shamed for it. Either our interests are cringe, or we're fakers, or our interests are used as an excuse to sexualize us. Therefore, many people who experience this end up blaming those experiences on being AFAB. Therefore, this reflects on how female characters in media are perceived. And I know when I say this, it sounds really fucking obvious, but really this does explain a lot of the misogyny in fandom. It feels so simple. Especially since fandom is often a space for outcasts, and fandom content is so often a reflection of the creator, consciously or not. We project so many parts of ourselves, our emotions, our trauma, our desires, onto these characters. And sometimes, we might end up projecting something negative on accident. It's a normal experience that unfortunately a lot of us go through. Even me. Now, these are absolutely not the only theories as to why this phenomenon occurs, but it's just a few trends I've noticed. But you may be wondering, so what? What do we do with this information? Ultimately, there isn't really an easy solution to this. All fandoms are going to have their sore spots, and I know misogyny in fandom is likely never going to fully disappear. Still, in making this video, I want to suggest that we all think more critically about how we perceive the female characters we see on screen and the ones we write. And I'm not saying you're not allowed to dislike any of the characters I've talked about today, rather, just try to analyze your biases and reasonings for hating the characters you do. Even if it doesn't feel like it helps the problem, self-reflection is good in any context. This is something I've been trying to remind myself to do more often, and I think it's something we all need to remember. And always remember to say, I'm sorry, women.